God bless America. Good morning, everybody. I am the Talk Radio Protege. This is the Protege program. Thank you for joining me. Charting new territory with this video, I wanted to present to you my thoughts, review, and analysis of The Darkest Hour, a recent movie about the first real obstacle for Winston Churchill when he became Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Now, to give you a peek into what I think about movies, because I wouldn't consider my taste in movies to be mainstream. So, some examples. My favorite movie of the century so far has been the Peanuts movie that came out a few years ago. I did enjoy, for entertainment purposes, the prequel trilogy of the Star Wars franchise. I think the only correct way to watch the Lord of the Rings trilogy is all 6 discs of the extended edition. And I hated the insult to the source material that was the animated movie Ferdinand that just came out this past couple of months. All that being said, full disclosure aside, here goes my thoughts on Darkest Hour. As is the usual in a movie review, please beware of minor spoilers. I don't think I'll be talking about any of the major plot points, but if you haven't seen the movie and you don't want anything spoiled, then I recommend you go watch it. I do recommend it as a watch. I did thoroughly enjoy it. I would overall score it a 9 out of 10, all things considered. I thought that it was a thrilling story. There was some suspenseful elements involved. Not knowing the full history of the events that are depicted in this film, I didn't happen to know the ending to everything. I had recently seen the Dunkirk film, so that's one of the key events that follows up Darkest Hour. I think it would make for a very good theatrical experience to watch Darkest Hour and Dunkirk back to back, because the two movies depict events that follow closely right along with each other. So I did have a little bit of the ending spoiled for me just by having that historical knowledge, but I think for a person that doesn't know how the history plays out, it would be a very thrilling political and historical story. So I would give it a 9 out of 10 in the storytelling element. The movie seems historically sound to me. There is not what's been happening in Hollywood, especially recently, a unnecessary use of modern language, especially modern curse words, in movies that are set in a historical setting. For example, the recent King Arthur movie, I think it was called The Legend of the Sword or something like that, dropped one audible and one inaudible F-bomb. And to my knowledge, that word wasn't in use in the time period when that movie is supposed to be set. So that's what I mean when I say historical, genuine language is used throughout the film. So I really appreciated that. I thought that the acting was ranged between good and great across the board, and I don't have any comment on the special effects or the soundtrack. From what I observed, just as a lay person, not having great knowledge of special effects that would be used in this type of film, I didn't think there were a lot of special effects to comment on, and the soundtrack didn't really stick with me, so maybe you could say the soundtrack wasn't good enough to stand out. That would be my comment on those things. The effects weren't bad enough to stand out or good enough to stand out, and the soundtrack wasn't good enough to stand out. So there you have it. Now, in my analysis of this film, I like to look for parallel elements in the movies that I'm watching and the times in which we're living. And the parallel that I observed in this film, Darkest Hour, it struck me how similar Winston Churchill's transition into power was or is, I guess I should say, with President Trump's. Especially considering President Trump's run through the primary and his subsequent general election campaign. Neither Winston Churchill nor Donald Trump were wanted in power by their own party establishment. As is depicted in the film, Neville Chamberlain, the prime minister before Winston Churchill, and several other of the Conservative Party establishment wanted a different individual. I don't recall the man's first name, but his last name is Halifax. The Conservative establishment wanted Halifax to lead as prime minister, but they had to settle on Winston Churchill because they knew he was the only conservative in the government that the opposition, who would be the Liberal Party, I believe, of the UK, would accept as prime minister. So they were forced to elect Winston Churchill to be prime minister, kind of like Republicans were forced by their own electorate to elect Donald Trump to be president of the United States. Both Winston Churchill and Donald Trump are considered, especially by the social elite, to be uncouth ruffians. They use coarse language. They do strange things that the social elite just don't do. For Winston Churchill, he would drink alcoholic beverages throughout the day. He smoked cigars, multiple cigars throughout the day. He used what would be considered coarse language for the time, in much the same way that Donald Trump drinks a dozen Diet Cokes in a day, allegedly, eats ketchup on his steak, allegedly, uses words that the political establishment and the social elites just would never, quote-unquote, lower themselves to use. Both of these men, Winston Churchill and Donald Trump, espoused policy and rhetoric that were condemned by the party establishment, but as is depicted in the film and as it was demonstrated in the election, are desired by the countrymen. Winston Churchill was considered a warmonger by the political and social elites of his time, but in one scene of the film, minor spoilers, beware, Winston Churchill abandons his detail, goes down into a subway car, and speaks to some of the, I guess you could say, the ordinary countrymen of the UK at the time, and he gets a feel, or he tries to get a feel for how the real people of the United Kingdom feel about going to war with Germany and the Axis in World War II. By a parallel element appears in Donald Trump, how he does all of the rallies in the places where people don't want to go. He tries to reach out to Americans without using the mainstream media. He has espoused policy that is considered, is decried by the mainstream media and the political elites as racist, sexist, bigoted, homophobic, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. There is, however, one big contrast between the Winston Churchill of Darkest Hour and Donald Trump today. And I think that it is somewhat indicative of the times that we live in. In the days of World War II, there was one particular political theory that was not pervasive throughout big swaths of political parties. And because that didn't exist in the way that it does today, the country was more or less united on its own greatness, its own sovereignty, its own right to defend itself from an evil empire, and actually able to say definitively that a rival country was evil. Now, today, you wouldn't have anybody in politics dare to say that another country who historically has just as much legitimacy as ours is evil. If a World War II were to break out today, Barack Obama would never say that Germany was evil. Theresa May would never say that Germany was evil. But the other big contrast is that Trump is not cheered by the opposition. Winston Churchill is depicted as being loved by his opposition party. Donald Trump is not only not desired by his own party's establishment, he's not desired by any member of his opposition party. There are very few, even Democrat voters, that want Donald Trump to be successful, much less Democrat politicians that want Donald Trump to be successful. All in all, I did thoroughly enjoy the movie. It is, I think, it could be used as a conversation starter. This is a film that you could take your older children to go see. There's not a lot of violence depicted. There's a scene where you see dirty and wounded soldiers. There's scenes where you see bombs explode. So there is a little bit of violence depicted. There's only one instance of a modern curse word being used, but I think it is historically appropriate, and it's somewhat muffled by what's happening around the scene. So something, again, I think you could take older children to see. It's something that you could use to start a conversation about political unity in the country. There's a unity in the UK that's depicted in this film that just doesn't exist in modern Western democracies. And I think that is something that could be used to start a conversation with your children, with your family. Definitely not a film that young children or even the age group that ends at 11 or 12 would be interested in. But certainly older children and teenagers might be interested in this film, and the events might be intrigued by the conflict that goes on enough to pay attention and really soak in the historical aspects of the film. It gets a recommend from me. I hope that you enjoyed this video and enjoyed my take on the film. If you want to see more movie reviews like this one, make sure that you leave a comment and let me know. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe. That would really demonstrate that this is a good video format to pursue. If you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell for notifications so that you don't miss more videos like this one in the future. And one last thing, especially if you disliked this video and do not want to see more movie reviews, make sure you leave a comment so that I will know what my viewership wants. Thank you all for joining me. There will be another video up later this evening, so if you're not subscribed, make sure you do subscribe because you will not want to miss that one. We'll be talking about the big news events of today. There's no telling what is on the horizon for the news events at the beginning of the day, so you won't want to miss it. Until that next time, though, have a fantastic day, and God bless.